Hello. This is a short demo of a little project I worked on a couple years back now. It's a Game Boy Color emulator written in Rust. I know there are many of these. It's a very common project to develop, especially for a language like Rust. But yeah, just wanted to kind of share my version of this. There's nothing in particular I would say that is unique about my version. It's a generic emulator. It doesn't yet support all ROMs I've tested. In particular, there are some issues that I never got around to debugging, honestly. Playing some games such as Pokemon Gold, but many are supported. That's one thing to point out. The second thing to point out is that I didn't get around to implementing sound. So you get to play, everything works, but no sound, unfortunately. Other than that, one thing to point out, if we look at the page here, is that there's a WASM version of the emulator that you can try out here, and I'll demo it in a second. Let's see, what else? There's rudimentary debugging support. You can build the emulator. It isn't compiled in by default, but you can build it with debug support. And that gives you a GDB-esque CLI that you can use to set breakpoints, dump out an instruction stream, etc. But I've seen much fancier debuggers for emulators, so it isn't really noteworthy, I would say. Let me kind of quickly demo how this works. So let me zoom in a bit here. You can build it with Cargo. There's a Cargo. It's a Rust project, but I'm into Nix. That's my obsession these days. So I Nixify, or try to at least include a flake. A flake is essentially a Nix project. I like to include a flake with all of my projects, but that results in the emulator binary. And let's see, there's an inspect command. Samples, and let's look at Pokemon Yellow. So there's a little inspect command that lets you kind of dump out some information about the ROM. In this case, it tells us the title. Does it support Gameboy Color, cartridge type, and some details about the internals. But then we can also go ahead and run it. So if we hit run, then it'll boot up Pokemon Yellow as expected. Let's see. You can increase the speed. This emulator supports up to, I think, 5x, but probably could do more if I optimize things a bit. But there you go. So that's running the demo the emulator natively. You can also, essentially, the core emulator logic is agnostic to the actual front end. So the way I've structured it here in the repo is there's the lib, which contains the core emulator logic, and it takes in all inputs, which is essentially the joypad or buttons commands or buttons sent. That's the input that the user has, and it outputs a frame. That's really the core implementation. And then as a front end, we have the GUI we just saw, which is SDL2. So it's nothing fancy, just a little SDL2 wrapper around the core library. But we also have this WASM build, which is there's a light wrapper exposed by Rust around the core library, And then JS can call into this WASM implementation. So if we go back to the link I shared earlier, we can do browse. We can open up Pokemon Yellow here. And if we just hit start, then we get the same thing, just running in a browser. We can also, there's even save state support, which I didn't show in the native or the GUI front end, but even in the browser you can hit save state, and then if we just reset and load state, then it brings us back. Saving state essentially serializes everything, CPU state, register state, internals of the CPU, and then as well as memory. So RAM information, VRAM, counters, what else? The ROM, no, because that's kind of static. And it dumps it out into a bin code, which is this popular Rust serialization format. And then you can just deserialize from that. Anyhow, that's a long-winded explanation, but yeah, this is just a little demo of my project. And if you ever get the chance to use it, then let me know if you see any issues. Of course, there are some known issues, like I mentioned, but the common ROMs should work without sound, unfortunately. Thank you for listening.